Thomas Massie just witnessed the total collapse of his two-decade political career on live broadcast, utterly dismantled by a man who treats politics like a high-stakes battlefield. Show me a single district where a Democrat sides with Republicans 25% of the time, and I will reveal a career that terminates before dawn. They would never permit that individual to endure politically. The voice slicing through the thick studio atmosphere did not belong to a media commentator, but to a figure who weighed his words like artillery. It was a freezing, brutal declaration of reality, hurled directly into the face of a lengthy political illusion. Consider that for a moment. Examine the entire political map of the United States. Go locate a deep, dark blue congressional district where Kamala Harris triumphed by 40 points. Scan every inch of it. Attempt to locate just one solitary Democrat politician occupying that position who possesses the audacity to cross the aisle and side with the Republicans 25% of the time. Just 1 out of every 4 decisions. Does that individual even exist? Are you joking? The corporate networks adore lecturing us regarding the left's beautiful diversity of thought and their welcoming big tent. However, behind the lenses, the truth is a relentless, uncompromising iron discipline. If a Democrat in a core stronghold ever dared to double-cross the party line in that manner, they would not merely lose their upcoming election. The Democrat apparatus would have them politically banished before the late-night broadcasts finished transmitting. They would be metaphorically deported to a remote exile in Antarctica or locked away in a maximum security facility, erased from the faction's memory permanently. The left is hypocritical, they are ruthless, and they are destructive. Yet they understand how to play the match to secure victory. Conversely, look at what we have been permitting on our own side. Observe Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. This is a region where Donald Trump triumphed by nearly 40 points, constituting one of the most rock-solid, fiercely dedicated conservative bastions in the entire nation. And who did the citizens dispatch to Washington to speak for them? A guy named Thomas Massie. For years, this individual occupied a hyper-conservative seat while taking cover behind the arrogant label of an independent, libertarian intellectual. He utilized that impressive title as a defense to excuse being a persistent, annoying thorn in the side of the America First agenda. When it mattered the absolute most, he was not fighting for freedom, he was functioning as an accidental, unpaid operative for the Democrat establishment. He transformed into the most dependable instrument that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer could have ever desired within a Republican caucus. But the era of accepting controlled opposition beneath our own ceiling is finished. Politics is a collective pursuit, and it is a fierce battleground. If you decline to stand with your allies when the conflict truly erupts, you are not an independent intellectual, you are a sheer liability. Tonight, beneath the blinding, unforgiving glare of the television studio spotlights, this is not merely another routine political debate. This is a severely overdue public reckoning. This is the precise instance the America First movement extracts the scalpel to finally remove a toxic element that has been draining our margins for entirely too long. The crimson tally indicators on the studio cameras flashed to life, capturing the arrogant, defiant smile of a career politician who still perceived himself as invincible. I have dedicated my entire career refusing to yield to party bosses because my allegiance belongs to the Constitution, not a political club. The defensive opening volley was calculated, delivered with the practiced fluency of a guy who bought his own legend. But across the platform, the figure positioned behind the rival podium did not blink. Ed Gallrein, a man with 30 years of Navy SEAL discipline carved into the lines of his visage, simply stared back with eyes that had witnessed far greater perils than a Washington bureaucrat. There is a massive distinction between possessing principles and systematically betraying the exact citizens who elected you. The veteran's tone was deep, unwavering, and completely devoid of theatrical political exaggeration. You label it independent thinking, Thomas, but the record labels it a betrayal of your constituents. Massie's smile did not vanish, but his posture stiffened just a fraction beneath his custom suit. The voters of Kentucky 4 know exactly who I am, and they know I do not take marching orders from anyone in Washington, including the president. They sent you there to battle for them, not to play defense for the opposition. I vote the way I vote because I refuse to inflate the national debt, regardless of who is sitting in the Oval Office. You sided with the Democrats 1 out of every 4 times, Thomas. The statistic was slammed onto the desk like a heavy weight, slicing right through the philosophical phrasing. 1 out of 4. That does not make you a constitutional purist. That makes you the most effective Democrat asset inside the Republican caucus. The studio crowd sat in a tight, breathless hush as the initial fractures in the old libertarian armor started to emerge. The clash had barely commenced, but the ancient rules of political theater were already burning to ash. You see, the issue with modern American politics is that entirely too many individuals treat Washington like a sanctuary, and the party platform like infallible scripture. The words slipped off Thomas Massie's tongue with a smooth, well-practiced rhythm that had mesmerized academic libertarians for over a decade. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, leaning casually against the border of his podium, as if he were instructing a room full of naive university students rather than standing on a high-stakes debate stage. The bright crimson tally light of Camera 2 stared right back at him, broadcasting his unfazed, arrogant demeanor to hundreds of thousands of nervous viewers tuning in across the bluegrass state. I do not travel to Washington to hold hands, play nicely in a sandbox, or kiss the ring of whichever political kingmaker happens to be trending on social media today. He paused, allowing the subtle insult to linger in the room, a direct strike at the fiercely dedicated, disciplined nature of the America First movement. My peers analyze a piece of legislation, and the absolute first thing they check isn't the text of the document or the long-term economic destruction it will inflict on the American taxpayer. He shook his head, a look of theatrical pity washing over his features. No, the first thing they consult is their smartphones to determine how they are being instructed to vote by an elite inner circle of populist influencers. The insinuation was transparent, sharp, and dripping with intellectual arrogance. He was depicting the entire MAGA movement not as a grassroots rebellion of patriotic citizens, but as a mindless flock operating on pure, blind sentiment. They have exchanged the foundational concepts of individual liberty and constitutional boundaries for the intoxicating safety of mob mentality. He hoisted a single finger, accentuating his argument with supreme confidence. They demand rubber stamps in Congress, not independent thinkers. They crave a political echo chamber where everybody wears the identical uniform, repeats the exact same slogans, and blindly marches off an economic precipice simply because the individual leading the parade ordered them to do it. He gazed directly into the lens of the primary broadcast camera, his smile expanding into a patronizing smirk. But I do not wear a uniform, and I do not accept orders from a political committee. My allegiance is locked into the document I swore an oath to defend the United States Constitution. And that document does not care about your party discipline, your whip counts, or your temporary populist phases. Across the stage, the atmosphere was completely distinct. Ed Gallrein stood like an unyielding monument of granite, his physical stature dominating his section of the platform. His hands rested flat upon the edges of his podium, utterly motionless, completely stripped of the anxious energy or dramatic gestures that defined his rival. The sharp studio illumination caught the rigid, unblinking focus of his eyes that had spent 30 years scanning hostile landscapes in the globe's most dangerous combat sectors. As a military commander, he did not flinch, He did not exhale loudly, and he did not interject. He merely watched Massie with the cold, calculating endurance of an apex predator, monitoring a target that was confidently strolling deeper and deeper into an inescapable trap. The voters of the 4th District did not elect me to be a follower in a Washington cult. Massie's voice escalated. Empowered by the heavy quiet of the space, they elected me to function as a firewall against the constant expansion of federal overreach, regardless of whichever political faction is steering the tractor. When the establishment informs me that I must vote yes on an unconstitutional, trillion-dollar spending package, simply because it helps the party appear favorable on the evening broadcast, my response will eternally be an uncompromising no. I do not care if the pressure originates from the Democrats. I do not care if it originates from the establishment Republicans. And frankly, I do not care if it originates from Mar-a-Lago itself. He leaned inward, his tone transitioning into something harsher, darker, and deeply inflammatory. We have witnessed what occurs when individuals abandon logic and surrender their judgment to a solitary personality. You get a government that functions on theatrical fury rather than practical reality. You get an administration that vows to drain a swamp, but ultimately surrounds itself with the identical old swamp creatures who are more invested in guarding their own secrets than serving the American populace. He released a short, mocking chuckle, dismissive of the entire political machinery. They inform you that compliance equals patriotism, and they inform you that independent dissent constitutes a betrayal. But genuine patriotism is standing utterly alone on the House floor, holding the line for the taxpayer. Even when your own faction is screaming at you to sit down and remain silent. I have spent my years in Washington acting as an independent voice, an unmovable barricade against the corrupt mechanics of the federal government, and I will not apologize to anyone for refusing to participate in a mindless political circus that prioritizes corporate optics over constitutional truth. He ceased speaking, adjusting his blazer, completely satisfied with the intellectual snare he believed he had just constructed. He had framed the confrontation exactly where he preferred it, a struggle between an enlightened, principled constitutional purist and a mindless political apparatus. He stood there, head held high, waiting for the challenger directly across from him to scramble for a predictable, defensive political retort. But the studio stayed dead silent. The only noise was the low, consistent hum of the climate control system and the faint, rhythmic clicking of the master clock on the wall. Gallrein allowed the quiet to stretch out for 3 agonizing seconds, letting Massie's conceited words linger in the air until they started to feel heavy, hollow, and utterly exposed. When the challenger finally spoke, his voice did not possess the frantic panic of a politician scrambling to win a debate. It possessed the devastating gravity of a commander issuing a battlefield verdict. It must be incredibly cozy for you, Thomas, living up there in the clouds with your abstract concepts and your flawless, untouched textbook philosophies. The words were remarkably quiet, but they sliced through the space like a freezing gale. You like to stand up here and discuss Washington as if it is an academic debate society where the individual with the fanciest speech captures a gold medal. Gallrein slowly lifted his hands off the podium, folding his arms across his chest, his posture emitting absolute authority. But out here in the actual world, where the citizens of Kentucky genuinely reside, politics is not a university seminar. It is a brutal, relentless battleground for the absolute survival of our nation. You observe the millions of patriotic Americans who constructed this movement, and you perceive a mindless crowd simply because they possess the courage to stand together as a unified force. But I look at them, and I perceive an army of working-class families who are exhausted from being lectured by condescending politicians who believe they are too intelligent to pick a side in a conflict. He leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto Massie's smirk, systematically dismantling it. You believe your isolation is an indicator of virtue, Thomas, but the citizens of this district are beginning to comprehend that your so-called independence isn't a badge of honor whatsoever. It is merely a convenient foxhole for a coward who is too terrified to stand shoulder to shoulder with his brothers in the center of a genuine firefight. Let us stop hiding behind the textbook definitions, Thomas, and examine the real-world wreckage of your legislative record. The shift was immediate, the challenger's words falling like a massive iron gate across Massie's academic escape path. The television studio's primary camera tightly zoomed onto Gallrein, recording the steady, unblinking glare of a man who refused to negotiate with political spin. You stand up here and preen for the cameras regarding your glorious intellectual isolation. But let us call it what it genuinely is. Is it truly independent thought? Or is it merely a convenient psychological defense mechanism to justify betraying the 40% margin of voters who trusted you to safeguard their families? Massie shifted his weight, his jaw clenching as he tried to interrupt, but Gallrein's voice simply plowed over him like an armored transport. Do not interrupt me, Thomas. You delivered your monologue. Now you are going to examine the statistics. We possess a razor-thin margin in the House of Representatives currently. Every single legislative session is a tactical operations environment where our majority dangles by a solitary thread. When the America First movement squares off against a radical machine that votes with absolute, unyielding partisan uniformity, every single vote is a live-fire engagement. But what do? Every single time the squad lines up on the ridge to hold the perimeter, you slide down into the grass, sprint to the opposing side, and hand the opposition the precise ammunition they require to derail the entire populist agenda. Your deliberate, calculated, no votes are not heroic acts of individual liberty. They are tactical betrayals that function as a direct, structural endorsement of the Democrat strategy. You side with the Democrats 25% of the time, Thomas. Ponder that figure. 1 out of every 4 times the gavel drops, you are standing shoulder to shoulder with Hakeem Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. That does not make you a constitutional iconoclast. It officially renders you the single most reliable Democrat asset concealed inside the Republican caucus. You are their spoiler, their wild card, and their ultimate safety net whenever they need to fracture our fragile majority. Massie finally shoved his way into the void, his voice escalating a full octave as he attempted to reclaim control of the intellectual high ground. That is a completely dishonest, partisan distortion of how a constitutional republic is intended to operate. He squeezed the edges of his podium, his knuckles turning pale beneath the harsh white studio illumination. I do not vote to score points for a team, and I certainly do not calculate my positions based on whether it makes life easier for party leadership in Washington. If a bill violates the text of the Constitution, or if it smuggles in unconstitutional federal expansions under the guise of an emergency, I will vote against it every single day of the week. My voting record is not a gift to the Democrats, it is a shield for the hard-working citizens of Kentucky's 4th District who are exhausted from Washington deceiving them. They did not send me to Congress to be a blind partisan soldier. They sent me to read the fine print. He aimed an accusing finger across the platform, attempting to push the weight of the indictment back onto the challenger. The genuine tragedy here is that individuals like you wish to surrender the entire legislative branch to a top-down command structure where nobody is permitted to ask questions. You desire a military platoon, not a deliberative body of free citizens. If the Republican Party brings a flawed, bloated bill to the floor, I possess a moral and constitutional obligation to terminate that bill, regardless of whose name is stamped upon the cover. I am safeguarding the economic sovereignty of my constituents from the reckless spending habits of both factions. Gallrein did not even flinch at the outburst. He simply adjusted his stance, his expression remaining completely unreadable. Chillingly professional. The citizens of Kentucky's 4th District do not reside in your textbook, Thomas. They live in a nation that is being systematically demolished by an aggressive, weaponized establishment. When you vote to kill a crucial bill, because it isn't 85 pages of your personal libertarian fantasy, the Democrats do not throw a tantrum about your constitutional purity. They throw a celebration in the cloakroom because you just performed their dirty work for them. You discuss reading the fine print, but you entirely ignore the massive, structural reality of the conflict we are genuinely fighting. When our margins are this narrow, your abstract protest votes do not save capital, and they do not protect the Constitution. They simply paralyze the executive branch's capacity to enforce the law, leaving our borders wide open and our national sovereignty totally defenseless. You are not shielding the people of Kentucky from Washington. You are actively disarming them, while the opposition is marching directly through their front gate. Your no votes are not shields. They are open invitations for the dismantling of our republic. You believe those voting percentages represent a betrayal of the people, Ed, but you are utterly blind to the actual corruption occurring right at the summit of your own movement. The smooth, lecturing cadence that Thomas Massie had upheld all evening finally shattered, replaced by a sharp defensive edge as his fury broke through on live television. He tossed his hands into the air, his documents fluttering violently on the desk, as his composure completely evaporated under the relentless pressure of the challenger across from him. The establishment wishes to discuss numbers, counts, and party loyalty, but they are terrified of anyone who actually shines a spotlight into the darkest corners of Washington. They are weaponizing candidates like you to run against me for one reason, and one reason only, because I refuse to stop demanding the unedited truth regarding the deep state cover-ups. He leaned so far over his desk that his microphone clipped, transmitting a harsh, echoing static through the entire broadcasting facility. Let us discuss what the America First leadership is genuinely attempting to conceal from the patriotic citizens of this nation. They wish to attack my record because I possessed the courage to call out the hypocrisy inside the previous administration, an administration that surrounded itself with swamp creatures and looked the other way. I called it what it was on the House floor, and I will state it again tonight on this stage for the entire world to hear. The previous establishment under Donald Trump's watch was nothing more than a scandal-ridden administration shielding the corrupt, elite secrets of the globalist class. They campaigned on draining the swamp, but when it came time to genuinely release the files, open the archives, and expose the predators, they slammed the door shut and buried the facts to protect their political allies. I am being targeted tonight not because I vote with Democrats, but because I am the solitary leader with the backbone to demand the full, unconditional release of the high-profile trafficking files until my dying day. The political machine desires a submissive group of followers who never look behind the curtain, but I will never apologize for exposing the moral rot at the absolute core of our federal government. The studio went dead quiet. The air turned ice-cold as the sheer, unhinged disrespect of the accusation hovered over the stage like a toxic cloud. It was the ultimate manifestation of total political hypocrisy, a masterclass in the exact double standards that drive genuine patriotic Americans absolutely insane. Here was a career politician sitting in a congressional seat, funded and delivered entirely by the loyal, hard-working conservative voters of Kentucky, using his final moments of relevance to parrot the disgusting, fabricated smear tactics of the fake news corporate media. The man who claimed to be an intellectual powerhouse, a supreme purist who was too brilliant to be fooled by anyone, was standing on live television, regurgitating the exact same debunked left-wing conspiracy theories that even the radical left networks had been compelled to correct and retract. He was biting the very hand that nourished his career, utilizing the vocabulary of the opposition to obscure his own extensive history of procedural betrayals. But Ed Gallrein did not look stunned, he did not look furious, and he did not grant his collapsing opponent a single millisecond to catch his breath or repair the destruction. You are a deeply pathetic, desperate individual, Thomas. And that disgusting slander demonstrates exactly why you are completely unfit to represent the proud citizens of this district. The Navy SEAL commander's retort was immediate, delivered like a heavy, concussive counterstrike that blasted right through Massie's frantic attempt to deflect. You wish to stand on this platform and discuss scandal-ridden files to stoke internet rumors, while you actively vote to let real-world criminals, traffickers, and syndicates cross our wide-open southern border every single day. Gallrein slammed his hand down onto the podium, his voice vibrating through the room with the unquestionable, thunderous authority of a genuine leader. Donald Trump spent 4 years fighting a multi-front conflict against a weaponized, corrupt establishment, sacrificing his business, his reputation, and his freedom to defend the American worker while you sat in your air-conditioned Washington office playing philosophical games with the opposition. You do not care about justice. You do not care about the truth. And you certainly do not care about the moral fabric of this nation. You are merely a bitter, sinking politician, using a cheap, theatrical insult to disguise the fact that you turned your back on your president, your party, and your country when the stakes were at an absolute maximum. You believe you are exposing a secret, Thomas, but the only thing you have exposed tonight is your own utter lack of honor, discipline, and basic human decency. Let us move away from the distractions of internet rumors and examine the actual, concrete damage your votes have inflicted on American soil. Ed Gallrein shifted his focus directly onto the center camera, his voice dropping into a deeper, colder register that commanded total control of the broadcast. We are in the middle of a historic crisis, a literal border collapse at our southern perimeter that is tearing the social and economic fabric of our nation apart. Every single town in America has become a border town, and every family is forced to deal with the deadly consequences of an open frontier. When the stakes were at an absolute maximum, when our movement put forward the most aggressive, comprehensive border security and immigration enforcement bill in modern history, where did you stand? This was not just another standard piece of legislation. It was a bill designed by Stephen Miller to explicitly fund a mass deportation operation, complete the border wall, and arm our federal agents to halt the flood of lethal narcotics destroying our youth. On that critical day, on the most defining vote for the survival of our sovereignty, you had a choice to make. You could have stood with Donald Trump, you could have stood with the Border Patrol Union, and you could have stood with the families of Kentucky, who are terrified for the safety of their children. But instead, you consciously chose to align yourself with the radical left-wing establishment. You voted no. You proudly walked down that aisle and cast your vote alongside Hakeem Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer to effectively terminate the border wall. By doing that, you actively chose to become a functional accomplice to the mass influx that is currently transforming our communities and putting our citizens in direct danger. You did not just reject a political platform, Thomas. You rejected the basic national security of the United States. Massie's face flushed to a deep crimson beneath the studio lights, his fingers gripping the edges of his podium so tightly that his knuckles began to tremble. That is a completely malicious, scientifically dishonest mischaracterization of my legislative record on foreign policy and federal spending. His voice fractured slightly, losing the smooth, academic composure that had defined his public persona for over a decade. That specific bill was packed with billions of dollars in unconstitutional foreign aid and hidden provisions that expanded the power of federal intelligence agencies under the guise of an emergency. I refuse to vote for giant, unread omnibus packages that use the border as a cynical hostage to fund a globalist agenda and increase our catastrophic national debt. My vote was not an endorsement of an open border, it was a principled stand against the corrupt Washington practice of stuffing bills with unrelated spending to force compliance through fear. I have introduced multiple clean, standalone bills to defund the federal agencies that refuse to enforce our immigration laws. I am protecting the taxpayers of Kentucky from being forced to finance a bloated federal bureaucracy that does not respect the Constitution. Gallrein did not yield a single inch of ground, cutting directly into Massie's frantic defense before the career politician could recover his breath. The mothers and fathers of this country do not have the luxury of hiding behind your procedural excuses while their neighborhoods are being flooded with synthetic poison. You wish to discuss the fine print of federal spending, but you completely ignore the real-world human cost of your deliberate inaction. When a criminal element or an illegal syndicate operates with total impunity across our border, they are not looking at your constitutional theories, Thomas. They are looking for a weakness in our line, and your systematic no votes provide them with the exact operational gaps they need to continue their trafficking networks. You did not protect the taxpayer. You disarmed the Border Patrol agents who are attempting to keep illegal gangs away from our schools and our local parks. This is not an academic debate about libertarian economics. It is a direct battle for the physical safety of every child in America. While you were busy granting interviews to corporate media outlets about your pure ideological record, real American families were paying the ultimate price for the open border policies you failed to stop. You turned a blind eye to a national emergency because the solution did not fit neatly into your idealized political worldview. The people of Kentucky's 4th District trusted you to be a shield for their homes and a defender of their sovereignty. But when the critical moment arrived to finally secure this country and protect the future of our children, you chose your personal brand over the survival of your nation. You left our border completely undefended, and no amount of slick Washington rhetoric can erase the betrayal written directly into your official voting record. You genuinely believe you are standing on an island of personal virtue, Thomas, but the reality is you have isolated yourself into absolute political irrelevance. Ed Gallrein took a step out from behind his podium, his massive frame shifting the visual balance of the entire television stage. You are not just fighting a local primary campaign against a retired veteran from Kentucky anymore. You are staring directly at the brick wall of a completely unified national movement that has run completely out of patience with your procedural games. The main camera locked onto Gallrein's face, transmitting the cold, unwavering stare of a commander delivering a final operational briefing. Let me extract you from your academic bubble for a moment and return you to the high-level reality of what occurred behind closed doors in Washington. I want you to think about the formal warnings you received from the actual architects of the America First agenda, men who spend every waking hour designing the policies to dismantle the deep state. Think about the words of Vice President J.D. Vance when he analyzed your record and laid out the cold, hard truth of what it is actually like to try to work with you in a legislative crisis. J.D. Vance explicitly stated that there is a massive operational difference between a colleague who is independent, a colleague who simply holds his own personal opinions, and a politician who deliberately votes against his own party on every single critical issue. He warned you directly that by turning your back on the team every single time a crucial vote came to the floor, you were systematically making entirely too many powerful enemies. Every single time the America First movement needed Thomas Massie to secure a close victory, every single time the administration needed your vote to push through a populist win, you were completely, stubbornly unwilling to provide it. You did not care about the margins, you did not care about the strategy, and you certainly did not care about the collective goals of the patriotic base. You just wanted to protect your own niche brand, even if it meant leaving our thin majority completely exposed to a counterattack from the establishment. Massie swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the floor for a brief fraction of a second, as the weight of the vice president's public condemnation was dropped directly onto his shoulders on live television. J.D. Vance knows exactly that my positions are rooted in fiscal conservatism, and I will not apologize for holding every member of government accountable to a balanced budget. His voice lacked the sharp, cutting authority it had possessed at the beginning of the evening, sounding strained under the suffocating pressure of the facts. I am a legislator, not a rubber stamp for party leadership, and no amount of top-down coordination from Washington will alter the text of the Constitution. The Constitution does not demand that you act as a functional spoiler for the only administration attempting to save this country. Thomas Gallrein countered immediately, refusing to grant his opponent a single square inch of rhetorical breathing room. Let us discuss Stephen Miller, the literal architect of the MAGA movement, a man who spends his entire career analyzing policy and fighting the open-border radicalism of the left-wing media. Stephen Miller does not create public personal attack videos. He does not waste his operational time on trivial political bickering, but he was forced to step forward and explicitly take you to the woodshed, because your record became an existential threat to national sovereignty. He laid it out clearly for the entire country to observe. On the single most defining issue affecting the long-term survival of our nation, the mass third world influx into America, you chose to turn your back on your country. On the most important bill, on the most decisive vote, on the single most critical day for the future of our borders, you deliberately sided with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. You chose to vote to terminate the single piece of legislation that would provide record funding for ICE and Border Patrol, the very tools needed to execute a historic mass deportation operation. Stephen Miller exposed you for exactly what you are, a politician who chose to side with the House and Senate Democrats over the absolute sovereignty of this republic. And if you think that was just a minor disagreement, look at the rage posts coming straight from Mar-a-Lago on Truth Social. Donald Trump has been relentlessly exposing your betrayal day in and day out, hunting down every establishment figure who tries to carry your water. You sit up here and discuss a deep state conspiracy against your libertarian ideals, but the only genuine conspiracy tonight is your total isolation from the people who actually built this movement. Massie adjusted his glasses with a trembling hand, looking across the stage and finally realizing the terrifying reality of his situation. He was not just debating a political challenger, he was looking into the eyes of a highly disciplined political executioner backed by the entire weight of the America First establishment. The old alliances were gone. His libertarian shield was completely shattered, and the high-level leadership of his own party had officially greenlit his total removal from public life. The president is being misinformed regarding the specific fiscal parameters of those bills by individuals who desire to eliminate all independent dissent in Congress. The voters of this district know that my record is pure, and they will not let a centralized political machine dictate who represents them. The voters of this district are fiercely loyal to Donald Trump, Thomas, and they are exhausted from watching you play games with the security of their homes. Gallrein's tone remained dead steady, a stark contrast to the rising panic on the other side of the stage. You can try to rationalize your record to the academic circles until the sun goes down, but the political reality is simple. Politics is a team sport, and it is a battleground. When you refuse to stand with your team during a historic struggle for the survival of the republic, you do not get celebrated as an independent thinker. You get treated exactly like a soldier who dropped his rifle and abandoned the trench in the middle of a live-fire engagement. You have no cover left. Your ammunition is completely spent, and the architects of this movement have officially closed the door on your political career. Look at the glass screen behind you, Thomas, and watch your entire political career evaporate in real time. Ed Gallrein extended his arm, his finger pointing directly toward the massive, multi-million-dollar LED wall, dominating the center of the television studio. The high-resolution display flashed aggressively, cutting through the dim studio haze with a sudden, brilliant transformation of data. The live election feeds from Decision Desk headquarters and NBC News just updated simultaneously, casting a stark digital reflection across the glassy surfaces of both podiums. The numbers were massive, definitive, and completely unyielding. With 60% of the total votes officially processed and accounted for, the challenger was leading by an astonishing, insurmountable 10.8 margin. The people of Kentucky's 4th District just sat in judgment of your record, and they have officially handed down their verdict. The time for your academic lectures, your procedural excuses, and your late-night television appearances is officially over. You spent years believing you were completely immune to the consequences of your choices because you thought you could outsmart the grassroots base. But the hard-working citizens of this state are not foolish, and they just use their ballots to strip you of your power. Massie shifted his weight violently, his entire body tightening as he stared blankly at the massive digital screen behind his opponent. The smug, theatrical grin that had remained plastered on his face for the last decade did not just fade, it completely disintegrated under the harsh glare of the data. His right hand descended onto the smooth, dark glass surface of his podium, his fingers tapping an uncontrolled, chaotic rhythm that completely betrayed his internal panic. Under the intense, unforgiving heat of the overhead studio spotlights, small beads of cold sweat began to visibly form across his forehead, glistening under the high-definition lenses of the primary cameras. He opened his mouth to deliver another smooth, intellectual counterstrike, but his throat seized, producing nothing but a dry, hollow silence that echoed painfully through the live broadcast. Look at the secondary ticker right beneath the NBC projection, Thomas. Gallrein's voice did not rise. In celebration, it remained chillingly professional, sounding more like a tactical commander confirming the successful neutralization of an enemy position. Polymarket just updated their real-time trading metrics based on the official data pouring out of northern Kentucky. My win probability just crossed the threshold to an absolute, unbendable 100%. Your probability has dropped to absolute 0. Not 99, not a fraction of a percent. The financial markets, the media networks, and the actual conservative voters who fund this party have all looked at your record and agreed on one thing: you are finished. This isn't a temporary fluctuation or a close statistical race that we are going to be litigating in the courts for the next 3 weeks. This is an absolute, overwhelming landslide defeat delivered by the very people you condescended to from your office in Washington. Massie gripped the edges of his podium again, his knuckles turning a fragile, bloodless white as he desperately tried to force his voice back into the room. This is a highly coordinated, top-down, artificial manipulation of the early absentee returns by an aggressive establishment machine. His voice was thin, reedy, and lacked even a fraction of the confidence he had displayed just 20 minutes ago. The rural counties have not been fully integrated into the master tally yet, and those are the independent thinkers who recognize the danger of a centralized party hierarchy. I have won this district repeatedly because the people value a representative who reads the fine print and refuses to capitulate to the populist narrative. The rural counties just rejected you by 20 points, Thomas. Gallrein countered immediately, his words striking like a heavy concussive blow that completely shattered the incumbent's final delusion. Stop lying to the cameras, stop lying to the voters, and for once in your life, have the decency to stop lying to yourself. The numbers on that wall are inclusive of the entire geographical footprint of this district. The working men and women of Kentucky did not vote against you because they were manipulated by an establishment machine. They voted against you because they watched you play games with their survival. They watched you vote to leave their borders wide open. They watched you vote against funding our security forces. and they listen to you use your platform to echo the cheap insults of the radical left. You genuinely believed that your intellectual arrogance made you completely untouchable. You thought you could sit on a massive 40-point Trump margin, act like an operative for Nancy Pelosi, and then return home every 2 years to collect their votes like a tax. But the America First movement is an active, breathing entity that values loyalty, discipline, and results above all else. We do not have the time or the luxury to indulge your narcissistic need to be different on the House floor. You wish to discuss constitutional purity, but your legacy is nothing but a long, pathetic string of missed opportunities and strategic betrayals that left our majority completely defenseless. Massie stood completely paralyzed, his mouth half open, his eyes staring helplessly at the glowing blue and red graphics of the NBC projection that officially branded him a loser on national television. The master politician who had spent a career manipulating academics. Let us define the true nature of this game before you walk off this stage and disappear into political irrelevance, Thomas. Gallrein stood tall, his arms crossed over his chest, his presence completely consuming the frame of the primary camera. Politics is not a high school debate tournament. It is not an academic lecture hall, and it is certainly not a vehicle to build your personal brand. It is a brutal, unforgiving battleground, and it is a supreme team sport in the middle of a historic war for the very survival of our civilization. If you choose to turn your back on your own trench, you do not get remembered as a hero. You have one single, inevitable destination. And just like that, the political theater fades to black, leaving nothing but the cold, hard reality of a landslide defeat written in glowing digital numbers. The studio overheads gradually dim, casting long, dramatic shadows across the abandoned podium where an untouchable incumbent just saw his political career completely dissolved. Let this historic evening serve as a definitive, thunderous wake-up call to all the high-minded political pundits, the corporate consultants, and the wishful thinkers in the mainstream media who have been desperately barking that the America First movement is deceased. They smugly informed you that Donald Trump had no more fuel left in his tank. They informed you that the populist wave had crested, that the conservative base was exhausted, and that the original fire of the MAGA movement had finally fizzled out into compliance. What an absolute, laughable delusion. Tonight, the loyal, rock-solid voters of Kentucky's 4th Congressional District did not just reject a candidate. They delivered a masterclass in political purging. They proved that our movement is not just surviving, it is aggressively evolving, sharpening its teeth, and operating with a level of absolute discipline that our enemies never saw coming. The total elimination of this unprincipled, uncooperative incumbent is not an isolated incident, is a historical pattern of absolute cleanup. Look at the political graveyard behind us. The globalist dynasties, the establishment sellouts, and the unprincipled opportunists who tried to hijack our party for personal profit are being systematically wiped off the map. One by one, the Bush dynasty is eradicated. The Cheney dynasty is completely finished. The Pence dynasty, the Romney dynasty, the McCain dynasty, all of them completely finished, discarded into the literal garbage bin of political history. And tonight, the undisciplined, unreliable toxic presence known as Thomas Massie joins them in the exact same gutter left in the mud where his legislative betrayals belong. Our base has officially run out of tolerance for controlled opposition operatives who use our own hard-earned margins to play defense for the radical left. But as one career politician falls into total obscurity, a far bigger question begins to emerge from the shadows of this historic primary. Now that the high-minded libertarian mask has been violently ripped off on national television, what is the next step for this freshly exposed asset? Will he follow the exact same predictable path of every single bitter, defeated establishment figure before him? How long before we see him sitting comfortably on the couch of left-wing talk shows, happily collecting corporate checks to spit venom at the very movement that funded his career for over a decade? How long before the corporate media starts parading him around as their brand-new favorite independent hero, simply because he has a fresh axe to grind against Donald Trump? But while the losers scramble for their remaining scraps of media relevance, the real focus shifts straight to the incoming guard. Ed Gallrein is walking into the halls of Congress with 30 years of elite Navy SEAL discipline packed into his legislative toolkit. He is not traveling to Washington to engage in academic debates, write theoretical essays, or build an individual media brand. He is heading to Washington to act as a direct, unyielding force multiplier for the executive branch. With a genuine warrior holding down Kentucky's 4th District, think about the level of structural defense we are about to establish. Think about how fast Stephen Miller's historic, comprehensive border security and immigration enforcement blueprint will finally become operational reality. When Donald Trump possesses a unified team of absolute loyalists holding the thin majority in the House. No more delays, no more procedural games, and absolutely no more stabs in the back from our own caucus. The era of the independent spoiler is officially terminated. The era of ironclad America First discipline has arrived. The line in the sand has been drawn, the toxic element has been extracted, and the train is moving forward at absolute full velocity. But what do you think is next for the America First movement as we head toward the general election? Will Ed Gallrein's historic landslide victory trigger a massive nationwide chain reaction that permanently sweeps the remaining hidden establishment targets out of Washington? Hit that like button right now. Share this video with every single patriot you know, and drop your unvarnished thoughts in the comments section below. Stay sharp, stay loyal, and never forget that this is a team sport, and our team is winning. This is your boy Benny, signing off from the front lines of the political battleground. MAGA is strong, the country is waking up, and we will see you on the next one.